All right, gentlemen, we are at the end of chapter 11 of the Tzemach Tzedek's discourse, Mitzvahs Hamanas Alakus. With the help of God, Be'ezras Hashem Yisbarich, we are going to finish chapter 11 tonight, and we're going to move on to chapter 12, which is the final chapter. We're nearing the end of this discourse. Last week we discussed what it means that God looks in the Torah and creates the world, and a human being learns the Torah, fulfills the Torah, and sustains the world. God looks in the Torah, creates the world, and man, through the Torah, sustains the world. Mekayem, he sustains, he upholds the world. How is that so? Because we explained that what it means that God looks in the Torah and he creates the world, very briefly, very succinctly, as we've been discussing for a few weeks, it means that he looks in everything that exists in the world of Akudim, in the world of Adam Kadmai, where everything is a simple expression. Everything of all the worlds, everything that was, everything that is, and everything that will be is expressed there all together as one and one unity in this initial expression of Ein Sof. After the Tzimtzum, which we call Akudim, or which we call Adam Kadmon. And God looks in the Torah and he creates the world, which means that he looks into this general expression, he looks into what is there generally, what is there in this unified way, and then he creates it from that general reality in a specific way. In other words, God looks, when it says God looks in the Torah, and the Torah says, let there be light, what that means is God looks in this general creation, and he sees that in this general expression, in this single unified expression, where everything is one. He looks there, and he sees the light. He sees what will become light, inherent in that expression. And as I explained at length last week, it's not just light that he sees there, but everything that corresponds to the sphera, everything that corresponds to that aspect of reality that corresponds to light in the creation. And then he goes on and he actually creates it, which means he takes it in this general expression, and then he expresses it in a limited and defined way by actually creating it in the sense with which we are familiar. So he takes it as it is in the Torah, which the source of its Torah is in the world of Akudim, is in this reality where everything is one, and everything is a simple expression of God, and everything is united there. And he creates the specific reality from that. He basically takes away in a multiple step process, right? There's multiple worlds and multiple descents. He takes away this unified reality and leaves over only a single aspect, a single creation, which is called light. And that's what it means when God looks in the Torah says, let there be light, so God says, let there be light, and he creates it. That means that he takes from the source and he creates the specific, he takes from the general source and he creates the particular creation, the particular aspect of creation. And when a human being studies the Torah, he really fulfills, in a sense, the same thing, from the opposite direction. Rather than creating it initially, he sustains it. He's reinforcing the reality of that thing. And we said, this is actually the secret, that Tzemach Tzedek explains, of why the Talmudic sages talk so much about everyday things, and everyday objects, and everyday occurrences. The example he gave is hurting a lizard on Shabbos. Right? Are you allowed to, what happens if you kill a lizard on Shabbos, on purpose, by accident? You damaged it, you didn't kill it, right? All of these different things in the laws of Shabbos. Why would they talk about such small things and such particular things? And the answer is because it's by studying these particular things in Torah that we're saying this thing doesn't only exist in the initial expression of God. This thing isn't only real in the unified world, in the infinite world of Akudim, but rather it's real in our world also. We draw down the thing as it exists in Torah as part of one unity, and we make it specific. Or in other words, the process of how God looks at the general reality of Torah and then creates a specific being, say a lizard, is mirrored by the way that the Chachamim, or the sages, looked at the general reality of Torah, which may not speak specifically about this lizard in this particular case, and they learn out this particular and this detailed case. It's the same process. They too looked in the unity of Torah and picked out this one one particular thing, and they teach a din, they learn what the Torah has to say about it, thereby basically unfolding the Torah from this unity, unfolding the Torah from the unity in which the lizard was hidden or concealed, and making it real in a particular way. We said, what's the example? We said it's very similar to how the Gemara is learned out from the Mishnah. The Tzemach Tzedek says was the last thing we learned last week. That the Mishnah is a very terse and very short work, and the Gemara is very, very long and very, very detailed and very, very complex. And yet, the entire Gemara, the entire Talmud, is contained within the Mishnah. If you know how to unpack it and how to expand on it, how to decompress it, we would say in computer language, right? It's there in a compressed way. You have to know how to get it out of like the zip file, right? Or how to decompress it, how to expand it. So the similar idea is here. If you look in the Mishnah, if you look at just the words of the Mishnah and what it appears to be saying on its surface, it wouldn't speak about the detail of hurting the lizard on Shabbos, for example. That may actually be a Mishnah, I don't know. But I'm saying, for example, the specific law in the Talmud. It wouldn't necessarily talk about it. But what you do is, if you have the wisdom and you have the means, you can unpack what it says from the Mishnah and you can apply it to all sorts of particular and specific cases. So too, all of reality and all of the worlds and everything that God creates in the 6 days of creation is concealed within Akudim, is concealed within that initial expression. And what does God do when He's creating it? He's unpacking it. He's revealing the particulars. He's taking the Mishnah and He's making from it a Gemara. He's making from it a Talmud. He's so to speak, he's executing this vision. He's executing this particular reality that's all unified in Adam Kadmon. That's what we were talking about last week. So let's go back a little bit. We'll go to page 359 in the Hebrew. Kamei HaMishnah Lagabe HaGemara, very close to the end of the chapter. Kamo HaMishnah Lagabe HaGemara. All right, Hebrew readers with us, Yavi? Fine. Kamo HaMishnah Lagabe HaGemara. Like the Mishnah is in relationship to the Gemara, Shakol Pratei HaDekdukim SheGemara Bichlolei Nichlolei Bichlal Mishnah. That all of these specific details that are in the Gemara are included in the general presentation of the Mishnah. Uchamaimer, as it says in the Gemara in Tainus, Ilfa mi ika midi deshali v'lei pshitna le mimasnisin. Is there a teaching, the sage says, as Ilfa said, is there any teaching that you can ask me from a braisa, which a braisa is what was left out of the what was supposed to have been left out of the Mishnah, right? That's why it's called a braita, because braita in Aramaic means outside or like an appendix, right? The Gemara is full of braisas, of teachings of the Mishnaic sages of the previous generation that were supposedly not included in the Mishnah, right? But it says in the Gemara in Tainus, was there any question on a braisa you asked me, Ilfa said, that I couldn't answer with a Mishnah? In other words, it's all in the Mishnah. You just have to be able to see it. Ilfa could answer every question from a brisa of all the oral Torah that was supposed to be left out of the Mishnah. He could find all the answers in the Mishnah. Everything is in the Mishnah. You just have to be able to unpack it, right? And that's the Tzemach Tzedek's point. V'chein Maimer Yenuka Derech Lakish, like the Yenuka of Derech Lakish said. We can't get into what a Yenuka is now. It's too long and interesting a story. We'd get very distracted. Mi ika midi d'chsivi b'ksuvi v'loy remizi be'araisa. Is there anything written in all of the writings, like in all of the scripture, that's not hidden within the written Torah, the original? I think it means the Chumash, if I'm not mistaken, is what he means. There's nothing in the whole Tanakh that's not included within the Chumash. Also, it's the same story, but you have to be able to find it in the original Araisa, in the original Torah. It's the same idea. In other words, the Tzemach Tzedek saying there's all these examples where we see that there's the whole vision which is hidden in a more general and a more general expression. This is all a metaphor for what takes place in Akudim, but it's not just a metaphor, because we do the same process in reverse, as I was explaining before, right? It's a metaphor, but the metaphor actually reflects the truth of what takes place. That we do the same thing when we learn Torah. When he goes and he finds all the laws in the Mishnah, it's like he's taking all of the realities that are unified in Akudim and he's recreating them or sustaining them anew, right? This should all sound like a review. Uchenal, so as we said before, second line on 358, Shaklal Arishan hu Ak. The first general expression is called Adam Kadmon, the primordial man, Ak, Akudim, this highest of the worlds that we've been discussing in this chapter. Shayakelel Kulam hu Bechinas Echad, where it includes everything, and when we say everything, again, we mean all spiritual worlds, and the physical universe, past, present, and future, everything that's within it is all included there in one unity. The Harav HaMagid Zal, the Maggid of Mezrich, used Karu Ur Klali. He called it, his name for it was the general light. That's what he called it. The Ur Klali, the general light. And afterwards, the realities are drawn down from that in a particular way, in their details. This is the inner teaching, the secret of what it says in Yeshayahu, that he called the generations from the beginning, or he called forth the generations from the beginning. Pirush, Rosh hu bechinas Ak. What is the beginning? The beginning, of course, refers to Adam Kadmon. Right? This is the Kabbalistic reading of the Pasuk. Rosh means Adam Kadmon, this world that we're describing, this general light. And the generations refer to all of the order of the four worlds as we normally describe them. Atzilus, Bria, Yetzira, Asiya, the physical world. So he called forth all the generations from the beginning, means that he called forth all of the worlds from this initial expression of Adam Kadmon. He called them forth from it, that they should be revealed from where they were hidden, right? If you think about it, the lashon of calling forth, that he called them, when you call someone forth, like if you're outside the house and you call your friend's name to come out of the house, right? You're not creating him anew. You just want to bring him out from where he's hiding. Right? That's the emphasis here. That's why the pasuk is particular, right? Because everything's already there in Adam Kadmon, right? He's karu esam. He's calling them forth. He's drawing down the particular realities from that initial expression. That's why the lashon is medayek. The language is specific. It doesn't say he creates them all from the beginning. It's he calls them forth because they're already there. Everything is already there in Adam Kadmon. He just brings them down into he unfolds them into an active reality, or however you want to look at it. Kamesh Emer. Ruven Balakan. I don't even know why I bother, because the Tzemach Tzedek says the same thing. Like someone that says, Ruven, come here. Right? Ruven already existed. But by calling him, he leaves his original place and he comes here. He comes close to you when you call him. So to all the generations. In other words, all the world, all the spiritual worlds and the physical universe. In the beginning, they were in Adam Kadmon, in this general light, which is also referred to as the machshava hakaduma, the primeval thought, the primordial thought, the original thought of the creation. In fact, Ak is sometimes referred to as machshava hakaduma the Ak, the original thought of Ak. When God thinks of everything that is, right, he thinks of it in Ak because it's all there together, it's all there as one.
So calling from Ak is Bria?
No. This is all before Atzilus. This is all before Atzilus.
So when you say he created light, so he called it from Ak.
Yes.
So it's Bria. So it's
Bria, as you're referring to, not as the Olam. You mean what it says in Sefer Bereshis. You mean like when we say Bria Sa'elam, Sheshes
when he calls something from Ak, he actually
creating it. Yes, in a sense.
It still doesn't have a form, so it doesn't actually exist. It's not Yetzirah.
No, it's not Bria in the four of the four worlds. It's not Bria in the four worlds. If you mean Bria just that it means that he creates it, then yes, it's creating. But it's not Bria of the four worlds. Don't get confused. Adam Kadmon itself is Bria. Adam Kadmon itself is like Bria.
I see.
Adam Kadmon itself is like if you want to. We've been over this before. But if you want to discuss Adam Kadmon and these higher worlds above Atzilus in the context of the four worlds, there is a way of doing it, right? Because as we've discussed before, there's a prati and there's a klali. There's like a microcosm and a macrocosm. That's a good word for it. There's a microcosm and a macrocosm. And in Kabbalah, as we know, everything is everything in Kabbalah is, what's the term? Everything is nested, right? Everything is like a fractal. You zoom in on one piece, and it looks the same as the the big piece, right?
General.
So with the four worlds, it's the same thing. So Adam Kadmon, very, very briefly, Adam Kadmon, as we've been describing it, this initial expression, this initial unified expression that contains everything and where everything is one, is part of the order of the worlds, but in the macrocosm, not in the microcosm. So in other words, imagine the four worlds, Atzilus, Bri, Yetzirah, and Asiya, as we normally discuss them in Kabbalah, right? Whatever they may mean, you don't really need to know for the map at least. So you have the four worlds. It's easier to draw, but I don't have any drawing utensils or anything like that. So you have the four worlds here. These four worlds together comprise in the macrocosm Asiya, the lowest of the four worlds. Because these four worlds are the actual reality of a separate reality from God. They're the actual thing that is created. So they're all Asiya. You understand? They're all four worlds, as we normally describe them, are all part of the lowest of the four worlds, right? In the macrocosm. There's the small version, there's the big version. In the big version, you have four worlds. In the small version you have four worlds. In the big version, all four worlds really constitute the lowest of the spiritual worlds. You're following, Ronnie? Because I'm saying this for you.
Yeah.
Then, above Asiya, you have Yetzirah Dechlalis. In the macrocosm, you have Yetzirah, which is, as we described before, that's what we would call the world of Nekudim, or Tehu, is the general Yetzirah. And then above that, you have the general Bria. Bria Dechlalis is Adam Kadmon, is the general Bria. Adam Kadmon is already Bria, even before God takes what's in Adam Kadmon and then creates it, because everything is already created. It's already the creation. Adam Kadmon, everything is there already, so it's already separate from God. It's already Bria. It's already, so to speak, by the standards of the larger four worlds, by the standards of the macrocosm, Adam Kadmon is a yesh. Adam Kadmon is an independent reality from God. Of course, it's not really independent from him at all. Even Atzilus, in the lowest level of the macrocosm, is not really independent of him at all. It depends what your standard is, right? It depends how strict you are, what counts as separate from him. And Atzilus Dechlalis, if I'm not mistaken, is Orin Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum. Got it? So Adam Kadmon is Bria. The creation of calling forth from Adam Kadmon is really Yetzirah and Asiya. And then within that Asiya, you have the four worlds as we normally call them. Yeah? That's the map. And if that helped you, it helped you. And if you didn't understand anything I was saying, that's also okay. It's not part of what we're learning really. So he's calling them out. When God creates from Adam Kadmon, he's not creating anew, as we've said the past few weeks. Rather, he's calling forth the specific creation from that more general place. That's what the verse is saying. The Tzemach Tzedek is basically explaining with multiple verses and from multiple sources now this idea of Adam Kadmon and the creation from this level of Adam Kadmon / Akudim / the Or Klali, the general light, the primordial man, whatever you wish to call it, where all of the Spirit are together, and everything exists there. Okay. So, Tach kol haderes, all the generations hayaberesh b'chinas akar, klali shu'inyan ha'machshava keduma, shetzeifa u'mebit ad seif kol haderes. I'm 4 lines up on 361. Shetzeifa u'mabit ad seif kol haderes. That it looks, Adam Kadmon looks and sees to the end of all, God looks and sees in Adam Kadmon to the end of all the generations. That with this thought, he creates everything. In other words, Adam Kadmon is where God looks at Adam Kadmon and he sees all of reality all together and all at once. There's no separation of time or space. Everything that is going to be created is there, all in one unity and in one thing, as we've been saying. And so when God looks at Adam Kadmon, he sees to the end of all generations, and with this thought, everything is created, right? It's a single thought, the thought of everything that will be created, the machshava keduma, the primordial thought God has of the universe, and within that thought, everything exists as a unity, as we've been explaining. V'lechein, in the parentheses, Amar HaRambam, shemetzia shel hanivrayim hanireh lanu eina amisas mehusan. Therefore, the Rambam says, very interesting, that the existence of all beings which we see, as we perceive them, is not their true essence, ela mikra asher karaloi, but rather Incidental. Mishum, why? Because their true existence is as they exist in the thought of the Creator. Meaning to say, in this general light. And this parenthesis is actually, the truth is we could spend a whole class just on this little parenthesis here at the end of the chapter. This is a radical parenthesis. That Tzemach Tzedek is doing it again. He's doing what he did earlier in the Maimer, which is he's taking something that the Rambam says. The Rambam, supposed to be the arch-rationalist, the philosopher, the anti-Kabbalist, and he's saying something the Rambam says refers exactly to Kabbalah. This is exactly what he meant. He was referring to the Machshava Keduma Da'ak, which is a fascinating thing in general. The Tzemach Tzedek is saying that this thing that the Rambam was talking about this particular expression of godliness in the Machshava Keduma. And how that could be, and the ramifications of that, I don't know, but you could spend a whole class on it, or more. So basically what the Rambam says, very short, the Rambam says from a philosophical perspective, it would seem, at least superficially from a philosophical perspective, the Rambam says very simply, in agreement with many other medieval Jewish philosophers and thinkers and all of these things, that essentially taking what would secularly be called lahavdil, a Platonistic view of things, like Plato, a Platonic view of things, that essentially everything is really only, it's sort of like a mixed, it's not really a straight Platonic, I don't know, whatever. No philosophy majors here, we're fine. So, it creates, essentially what the Rambam says there, philosophically speaking, is that God's thought of everything is essentially the truest reality of that thing. Everything exists basically in two ways. It exists in the particular way that it exists, and it also exists in the mind of Hashem. And the reason why philosophically you're brought to think this way is because it answers a lot of questions. It answers a lot of theological questions that we can't get into now. We're just going to go through this parentheses very quickly. So long story short, the Rambam essentially says that the existence of everything exists in two ways. It exists in its particular form as our minds perceive it, and it exists also in the mind of God, as God perceives it, so to speak, as God has a relationship with this thing. And of course, the Rambam would tell you that God's perception is no different than God's creation, which is no different than God's being. If you'll remember all our earlier discussions and all our earlier chapters, because God has no parts and God has no thought and he has no mind separate from his very essence, right? So the Rambam would tell you that this is all just God-godding. And we call it thought because that's the easiest thing to call it for us to understand, right? This is all just brief chapter headings, because we're not going into this very, very deeply. And so what the Tzemach Tzedek is essentially saying is that this true reality of the thing, the true essence of the thing, which the essence of the thing does not really exist only in the thing itself, but exists most deeply in the mind of God, this essence is as God perceives of it in Adam Kadmon, in this original thought, in which everything is one, his initial thought for the universe. That's what the Tzemach Tzedek is saying. And essentially, the actual existence of the thing in our world is essentially accidental. Accidental in the philosophical sense. Not meaning the opposite of on purpose, but meaning that this is not the essence of the thing. The thing happens to exist in our world, but it really exists in the mind of God. And that is what we're saying is in the Machshava Keduma, the initial thought of Adam Kadmon. That's what the Tzemach Tzedek says. Shenikra machshava keduma kanal, v'nikra tzachtzachis v'eser sfiras hagenuzos beloved pardes. And this is what is called tzachtzachis, the shining place, and the eser sfiras hagenuzos, and the 10 concealed spheres in the pardes. So we have many names for the same concept. You have akudim. This is all in this chapter. This is only the ones mentioned in this chapter. You have akudim, which means gather together, where all the spheres are gathered together. You have Adam Kadmon, the primordial man. You have the Machshava HaKeduma, the original thought, right? You have you have Tzachtzachis, which is the shining place, which was the Lashon of the Ramak, and you also have the Eser Sfiras HaGenuzos, the 10 hidden spheres. These all refer to the same thing. These all refer to this initial reality. Let's do the synopsis in English quickly. This section, meaning chapter 11, explains the fourth fundamental principle of faith mentioned by the Rambam, that God is Kadmon, that is first. In other words, his existence does not have a beginning in time. This cannot be said about anything else. Every other entity has a beginning in time, that is, the moment it was brought from a state of non-being into being. The description of him as Kadmon, as primordial, does not really refer to chronological precedence, that is, that he existed before the world. Instead, the intent is that he exists before everything, even before time itself, for time is also one of his creations, and therefore was brought into being from God who existed before it. The Tzemach Tzedek then continues, describing the nature of the limitations of time, stating that time is a composite of limited units, and since every one of these larger units is comprised of smaller units, it is impossible to say that an infinite amount of time passed, for it is impossible to gather many limited units into one until one amasses something unlimited. Limitation can never produce the unlimited. And since time is limited then, as is true with the creation of every limited being, it was preceded by non-existence. Right? Time was created from nothing. As such, before time came into being, before time, right, which is a very difficult concept, there would have to have been a state of existence in which there was no time at all. Only God is independent of time. The Tzemach Tzedek notes that our sages state the order of time existed before creation, but he explains that there is a difference between time and the order of time. The order of time is also a creation that came into existence. Although it preceded the actual creation of the world, existing when time as we know it did not exist, it is closer to the concept of time than the timelessness we ascribe to God. So there is God, who is truly above time. There's time, which was created with the world. And then there's something called the order of time, which exists in godliness, which exists in Elokus. It's not God, but it's not the world, right? You have this intermediate notion called the order of time. The Tzemach Tzedek completes the explanation of this concept in section 12. He proceeds to give the background for this explanation, referring to section 4, which states that the reason countless different types of entities could be brought into being from God's simple oneness is that after the tzimtzum, after the initial contraction, the ray of his light was drawn down into the 10 spheros. The interaction between the light and the different types of vessels brings about the various types of created beings. But bringing these 10 vessels into being from God's simple oneness also requires an intermediary, one which can, on the one hand, relate to the simplicity of God's infinite light, and on the other hand, relate to the varied identities of the vessels. Right? This is what we've been talking about the past few weeks. This enables us to understand the Zohar statement that God looked into the Torah and created the world. The Torah is identified with Adam Kadmon, which represents the primeval thought of creation, in which God gazed and surveyed all existence until the end of time. It contains within itself the potential for every element of existence, like a general conception of a project that includes all the details that will later emerge. When God looks into the Torah, he shines godly light into the Torah, enabling the particular elements of the world to come into existence from this more general conception. The order of the downward progression of the spiritual cosmos follows the pattern in which particular entities are drawn from a general category in a progression in which the particular entity on a higher level becomes the general category for the particular entities on the level below it, right? General goes to specific, and then the specific becomes the general for the next level. We explained that one of these weeks. This concept is illustrated in the relationship between the Mishnah and the Gemara. All of the particular insights developed in the Gemara are included in the general presentation of the idea by the Mishnah. As Ilfa said, is there anything you can ask me from a Braisa that I cannot resolve through a Mishnah? Or to cite another example, it is said, is there anything that is written in Scripture that is not alluded to in the Torah? To apply these concepts to the analog, the most elevated general category in the spiritual realms is Adam Kadmon, which includes all existence as one. From it are drawn down afterwards all the particular levels of existence. Adam Kadmon is thus identified with the primeval thought of creation, in which God gazed and surveyed all existence until the end of time. Even the synopsis is very long. It was a very long chapter. I think it took us 10 or 11 classes to do this chapter, so don't feel bad if you didn't remember everything from the beginning. L'chaim.
Maybe we should make a l'chaim. Is there an end of time?
Is there an end of time? Everything that has a beginning has an end. What that means, I don't know.
We're close.
It's what I've heard. All right, so ends chapter 11. Let me pass out the copies for chapter 12. Chapter 12 is the last chapter of this discourse, everyone. Very exciting. And chapter 12 is a continuation of chapter 11. No need to worry if you still have unresolved questions from chapter 11, because chapter 12 continues right where chapter 11 left off. Not on a new topic. It's a continuation of the old topic. Chapter 12 is also action-packed, full of interesting things, by the way. All right. right, does everyone have a copy? Yes.
So were our spirits created in
Everything
that world?
everything is there in that world, yes. Not just our spirits, but every particular detail of our lives, down to the most particular detail. Like I said, for a couple of times we were learning this. Us learning this class right now is in Adam Kadmon. It's present there. Everything that is going to be in all of history is in Adam Kadmon. It is all there. Now we're going to connect this concept basically back to time, which should be interesting, and the order of time. And eventually, even at the end of the chapter, we're even going to touch on what is some people's favorite, which is Yediyah Bechira, knowledge and free choice, which is some people's favorite topic. All right. Chapter 12.
Oh, big letters.
Va'ata. Chapter 12. Va'ata. Now, Yuvan Gamken, we can now also understand, with all of those brief prefatory remarks about Adam Kadmon and Akudim and everything that I just read in the synopsis, with all of that, we can now understand Gamken binyanis habus hazman memenu yizbarich, how time is created from God. May He be blessed. How God creates time. Shulamaila min azman lo gamre, because He is totally above time. Va'afilu min hemshech habilti meshur, and even the concept of an infinite amount of time He is also above. Canal, as we said in chapter 11, right? It's not that God is. When we say God is not confined to time, we don't mean that He's existed always within time. We mean He exists beyond time, right? This was a distinction we drew at the beginning of chapter 11. He's beyond even an infinite amount of time. Time is a limited creation. It comes in limited measures, right? This is all at the beginning of chapter 11. God is not bound by any of that. Time is a creation, and God is beyond it. Rameh, Rabbi Menachem Ovadia of Panua.
That's what it says?
That's what it says. In his text, Asara Maimoris, as it's all written there. Ella, rather, what is God? Hu bebechinas heve tamid. God is a constant, literally a constant present existence. He constantly exists in the now. In other words, He is unchanging through time. Time has no effect on Him. He is beyond time. Ayin Tosfos Yom Tov ba'Avos Perek Hey. See the Tosfos Yom Tov on Pirkei Avos, chapter 5. V'hishavusei hu gam ken bebechinas klal ufrat. And the way that time is created is in the same way we described in the previous chapter of klal and prat, of general creation and then particular creation. There's the general existence as it exists in that highest of worlds, and then there's the particulars as they are called out and drawn forth and unfolded from that highest reality. Time is no different. Time is a creation like all other creations and is created in the same way. Al derech hishavus haribui min ha'achdus, the same way that many things are created from one unity, as we described in the previous chapter. She'eschalkus hazman, because the division of time, hu ribui chalakim gvoliyim, is into many limited amounts of time. Time is divisible. Time comes in many discrete portions. You can measure an amount of time. Right? Time comes in a quantifiable amount. Just like all the other creations come with their limitations, right? You have the table doesn't extend as far as the chair doesn't extend as far as the floor, etc., etc. Just as in space, right, there's all sorts of measurements and quantifiable measures. The table only goes so far and not further, right? And space itself is also measured in that way. So too is time. Time is the same. Time is the same notion. That time is the measure of change. It's the space of change, if that makes any sense, right? Or space is the time of I guess you would say of
That's the theory
the
of
good word
relativity.
is. I don't know if it's the theory of relativity, but
Which made, really sort of showed that time...
right, time and space are connected, yeah. So the whether it's elastic is not the most important thing. The most important thing is that it's not infinite. It's a measurable amount. As I explained to you in chapter 11 at length, that in general the Torah notion of space and time is not the same as the absolute notion that is sometimes used in science. That there is just sort of this existence of space and time that exists separate from everything else, that's moving within it and taking place within it. Right? The Torah conception of space and time, as we've been talking about, is really the measurement between things and the measurement of things. You're measuring the extent of things and you're measuring their change. Is basically space and time. And you can measure the extent between them, and you can the extent to which they don't change. But the bottom line is that space and time are connected and deeply bound to limited reality. The limited reality, space and time are functions of the limited creations in the limited reality. That's what he's saying. That space and time are multiplicities, and they too have to be created from God's unity, just like everything else, just like the chair and the table and human beings and frogs and everything else. Everything else has to be created from God's unity, so too does time. Last line on page 3, I guess it's 367. There is a general light that includes all of time in one expression. Sorry, that includes all of the creations together, and so too all of the parts of time in one unity, where all of time is one, where all of time is united. This is what it says about Hashem. This is actually in the Machzor, if I'm not mistaken, that he looks to the end of all generations in one glance, that he sees everything that takes place. It's not that he has to watch it as it happens, right? He sees everything at a glance. With one look, he can see all of history together. What is this obviously describing now that we did the previous chapter? It's obviously describing this general light, this level of Adam Kadmon that exists before the world is created. And afterwards, he draws forth from this single glance and divides it into several different units, several different aspects. Each one including a large amount of time. But not the entire time of the 6,000 years. 1 second. Because with regarding these divisions, it says, Ki elef shanim beinecha kayom esmo, right? This is from Tehillim. That 1,000 years in your eyes is like yesterday. It's like one day. Shebechinas echad and nikrayim kol zman elef shanim babas echad. Because each one of these divisions, which are called a day, refers to 1,000 years at once.
Oh, that's why it's not the 6,000 years.
Correct, because they're divided. In generally speaking, we say like this: that here's the crash course in Kabbalistic, the Kabbalistic view of history, which is not going to be the same one you find in any history book or any science book, for that matter. It's like this: history, according to the Kabbalah, is divided essentially into 7,000 years. The 7,000 years correspond to the 7 days of creation. You have 7 days of creation. Each day is 1,000 years, right? So which means that the 7 days of the week correspond to each one to 1,000 years, to a millennium, right? It also means that the 7 spheres, which we are counting in the Omer, right, Chesed through Malchus, also correspond each one to 1,000 years. This 1,000 years measures essentially from Adam Arisha, from the first man until, so to speak, the end of history, which Darrell was asking about before. What happens then, I don't know. Right? It says Chad Charuv about the seventh millennium. It says there is the 1 millennium of destruction, but it could be positive destruction or negative destruction. Right? And generally speaking, it's interpreted as positive destruction, that the world will be so united with God that it can't even be considered to exist in the times of Mashiach, in the 7th millennium. So essentially, the time from Adam Harishon, as spoken about in the Torah, until so to speak, the end of history, according to the Kabbalah, is 7,000 years. Now, the 7,000 years, as referred to in the Kabbalah, as I said, each one corresponds to a svira. And so basically what we're saying, when he creates the 7,000 years of the creation, when he creates it in its specifics, that it's corresponding to the unfolding of the spheres. In other words, as we were describing in the previous chapter, all 10 spheres, all 10 sphirot are included within Adam Kadmon, are included within this single glance. And we said, and I've been saying all along, that this includes all of history, right? Past, present, and future. God sees it all at one glance. So the two things are connected. It's not that the spheres are there and all of history and everything that will happen happens to be there together, right? On the contrary, the 10 spheres, as I've said many times in this class, are the building blocks for all of creation. Everything is created. Everything in the spiritual universes and in the physical universe is created through the spheres. It's given form and given definition, and essentially its very essence through the 10 spheres. And as we said before, the combinations of the spheres, right? Because you have chesed shebechesed and gvura shebechesed and chesed shebegvura shebechesed, and all the combinations of all the different spheres. Now we're saying, what we're essentially bringing in chapter 12, is we're saying that you should know that the spheres also have a time aspect to them. That it's not just the spheres create individual beings, like different spheres go into creating the table than do to create a frog, which is what's described in the Kabbalah, but also that the spheres also have a time aspect to them.
What does it mean?
Space as well, by the way. Space as well is also created from the spheres. Well, everything that is created comes from the spheres. So, the spheres have a progression in the world of Atzilus, right? It's not all the spheres. There is a sense in which all the spheres are present at the same time. It speaks about this in Chassidus as well. There is a sense in which all the spheres are present at once, right? But there's also a sense in which one proceeds from the other, right? That chesed gives way to gvura, which gives way to tiferes, right? So the way that these things give way, the manner in which these things give way to one another is really the beginning, in a sense, the origins of time. And at the highest level, in other words, before they get divided into the individual creations, right? Like, for example, let's go back. For example, we've spoken about in this class before that the sweetness of the apple corresponds to chesed of Atzilus, right? This is an example brought by the Alter Rebbe in Torah. Right? The sweetness, if you have there's a bitter apple and there's a Granny Smith and a Golden Delicious, right? So the sweetness of the Golden Delicious, this is basically what the Alter Rebbe says in Torah, without the names of the specific, what do you call it? The specific types. Alter Rebbe says the sweetness of the sweet apple derives from Chesed of Atzilus, and the bitterness of the bitter apple derives from Gvura of Atzilus, ultimately. Now, there's almost, in a sense, there's an infinite number of steps between this low expression of sweetness and the kindness of Atzilus, or this low expression of bitterness and the Gvura of Atzilus, right? So what do those steps do, essentially? What's the purpose of those steps? Alter Rebbe explains this in Tanya, in Shar Yichud Ve'emunah, chapter 1, at the end of the chapter. What's the purpose of all of these steps? The steps between the sweetness of the apple and chesed of Atzilus are sort of like, a decent metaphor for them is like the electric transformer, right? If you hooked up your TV at home to the power that was coming out of the power plant, it would explode, right? The spiritual version of exploding is that it wouldn't be able to remain itself. That's the spiritual version of exploding. Right? So, for example, if you have someone, an example more understandable from human relationships, is if you have someone with a very strong personality, right, that comes to a meeting, they totally override the meeting. There's no room for anyone to be themselves at the meeting. You cannot express your own opinion. They totally take over. There's too much light, so to speak. There's too much of their expression. There's no room for everyone else to be themselves, right? This is the Chassidus or the Kabbalah version of hooking your TV up to the transformer, right? The point is that you need the electricity from the power plant, which is another way of saying that everything has to receive energy from God to exist. Everything is created by God, and everything gets its sustenance from the 10 spheres. But the sweetness in the apple is so much infinitely removed from the infinite kindness of God in Chesed of Atzilus that you cannot go from one directly to the other. It doesn't even make sense. There's no such thing as an apple which contains the sweetness of the Chesed of Atzilus. It's like a contradiction in terms. Right? The apple can't be an apple and still contain the Chesed of Atzilus. It's like hooking up the TV to the power transformer. So instead, you have a series of boxes, right, that come from the power plant, and they downgrade the voltage, right, until you're able to use it in your house. Similarly, there's many worlds and many steps and many descents which take this general expression of kindness and make it into specific, small, bite-sized, literally, expressions of God's kindness, so to speak, right, in that vein. So, how does that apply to time? Because as we just said, each one of the spheres corresponds to a millennium of the world's existence, from Adam to the end of history, whatever that means. There's 7,000 years, pardon me. So, each one of the spheres, when God unfolds it from Akudim, when he takes the particular reality and he says, let there be chesed, right? He's creating the reality of Chesed, one sphera, from the world of Akudim, from the world of Adam Kadmon, where everything is unified as one, that we've been discussing before. He takes that and he creates it. What he's creating is essentially, what it has within it is 1,000 years, 1,000 human years, so to speak. What is he doing? When he takes he then takes these 1,000 years of the potential for the spiritual reality of 1,000 years, as it is in Atzilus, and he brings it down through all the other worlds. And what that ends up doing is it ends up dividing it and downgrading it. So just like God's kindness goes through so many dilutions and so many steps that it's able to even express itself in the sweetness of an apple, so too the vast amounts of time which are contained within each one of the spheres are brought down and brought down and brought down until they're able to be each and every individual moment, every quantity of time that we can perceive within the world. Right? It's the same idea. The sphera contains within it the energy, the potential, the nature of 1,000 years. And by the way, Kabbalah talks about the millennia that have already passed, how those millennia correspond to the different spheres, which is interesting. And then he takes that energy, which is for 1,000 years, and he downgrades it and downgrades it and downgrades it and multiplies it and divides it until it is the flow of time with which we are familiar. That's what we're saying.
But then the time itself,
yes,
the number line.
Yeah.
The number line is the smooth out infinite number of,
correct.
Of really not quite discrete, because that's what makes it smooth.
Right. It's yes.
Infinite number
correct.
of points.
Yes.
Now, does that mean that the 7,000 years is sort of 7,000 God years versus we take that number line and we take the 7,000,
right?
And that could be normal human existence years.
I think he's saying that it's. I think what it's saying, at least in the simple interpretation, and I'm not an expert by any means, I think what it's saying is 7,000 human years in the regular understanding is the 7,000.
That's problematic for most human beings,
right?
Because the archaeological record,
right? Well, the simplest way that you can deal with that, and I'm not here to answer all questions on that matter particularly, but the easiest way to deal with that is simply to say that it measures from Adam Harishon, from Adam, which Adam doesn't have to be necessarily what we conceive of him as being per se. Perhaps he does and perhaps he doesn't. You have to learn more Torah and we have to find out. But it's from Adam 7,000 years. Whoever Adam was. Now it says Adam was the first man and he was created from the dust of the earth. Does that mean there couldn't have been anything else more primordially, something that the Torah views as animals? Because it says that on the day before Adam was created, there were animals created. And we already understand that the timescales could be skewed because we don't really understand necessarily what the Torah means by days. Not that the days could be non-literal. The days have to be literal according to the Rebbe's understanding, which I can't get into now. But the way in which the days are literal could still be a question of perspective, right? There's actually a book about this by an MIT physicist called Gerald Schroeder. He's an interesting guy. He has interesting books. So he talks about how the entire question of how much time has passed is really a question of perspective. It depends who you're asking, especially in light of relativity and things that I don't understand that he talks about in his book. And long story short, he thinks that 7 days and all of human history could be the same thing, literally, just depending on who you ask. And you could have billions of years in 7 days, and it could be the same from different perspectives. You can go read his book. Anyway, the bottom line is that there's answers to those questions. I don't know them, is the bottom line. I think the easiest thing to do is to focus on what the Torah says, which the Torah says that Adam was created by God. What preceded Adam is very vague, and the time measured from Adam until the end of history is 7,000 years. That should be sufficient, I think, for what we're talking about. So, and it may very well be, mind you, like I said, I'm not an expert, it may very well be that what Kabbalah is talking about is not 7,000 years measured as in human years. I think that the days mentioned in the Torah story of creation are literal in the Rebbe's understanding, and that's really not for now, but what the Kabbalah is speaking about when it talks about 7,000 years, you may very well be right. It may not be a literal 7,000 years, I don't know.
Traveling at the speed of light,
yeah.
A day in your life at the speed of light.
Right. That has something to do with what he's, that has something to do with what he's saying, and he speaks about something about how the creation of Adam, because quantum physics involves an observer-based phenomenon that someone has to observe it to make it real. So the creation of Adam would, so to speak, propagate this sort of change to time, such that if Adam were to look back, he would literally see only 7 days, even if it had been billions of years, because from the observer perspective, it's all theory. You can go read it there. It's not my specialty. It's not my. You can go read.
At least in squares.
Yeah, there's something. If that's what you're interested in, there's books. Gerald Schroeder is his name. You can go look at those. So anyway, the spheres, that's what we're talking about. The spheres are unfolded from this reality of Adam Kadmon, and they are brought into lower and lower divisions until they create time as we are aware of it. We are on page 369, 3 lines down. Afterwards, these levels are divided into even smaller units. That even these divisions include very long time within them. But less than the previous level, right? As you go down these different downgradings of the spiritual energy of the spheres. V'hu inyan Rosh Hashanah, which is the idea of Rosh Hashanah, the head of the year. That on that day, Nimshach Bechinas Echad, is drawn down one light. By the way, this is beautiful because this is what we learned about in the Mimer before this one, more than a year ago. So we were learning about at the end of Kuntras Umayyan. For any of the old hats here, we can think all the way back. We were speaking a lot about Rosh Hashanah and what's drawn down on Rosh Hashanah. If you think
we knew that.
Way back into ancient history, yeah. that on Rosh Hashanah is drawn forth one expression, Shekeleles Kol Azman de Shasa Yemei Hashanah B'Skira Achas, which includes within it all 365 days of the year at a glance, right? It's beautiful. In other words, on Rosh Hashanah, there's a mini akudim, so to speak, not at the level of all of the universe, at the level of the year. The year is expressed on Rosh Hashanah. There's one energy that's drawn forth. This is what we say, that God judges for the whole year on Rosh Hashanah, right? One energy is drawn forth on Rosh Hashanah, one spiritual reality, and that spiritual reality includes within it 365 days, the entire year. Right?
Then we draw whatever we deserve, right?
It's interesting that he says 365, because the Jewish calendar year is not 365 days long. So it's very interesting that he says 365. I only just thought of that now. He's saying by the solar year is drawn forth on Rosh Hashanah. It's very interesting, no?
So if you take 3 years and divide them, it's 365. Because we have
with the leap year and stuff, I understand. But he's still saying that on Rosh Hashanah you draw forth energy for 365, which goes 10 days into Tishrei the next year. Isn't that weird? Yeah. It's interesting. I'll see. I have a version of this with some commentary. Maybe I can see.
20 days bet-ins.
Yeah, either way, right. We look at it. That's interesting. Fine. And afterwards, it is downgraded. The power is brought down into 12 Rosh Chodashim, 12 heads of the month. Rosh Chodesh Kol Azman de Lamed Yom, which each Rosh Chodesh contains 40 days within it. 30 days within it. Again, he's using the solar numbers, not the lunar numbers, which is also interesting. V'acher kach leyomim. and then afterwards into days, v'acher kach l'shois, and then afterwards into hours, hem tzirufim havaya v'adnai, which are different combinations of havaya and adnai, two different names of Hashem. If you look in the Sifrei Kabbalah, they can tell you which names of God control every hour of the day. There's different names and different things from every hour of the day, which are connected to the various practices that we do. Like, for example, when we say Tikkun Chatzos, where we mourn the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, which is done in the wee hours of the morning, those are times of great mercy of God, which is why we do it then, right? Each hour of the day is connected to a specific sphera, right? So in a sense, you have every time is connected through all these different combinations into a very specific expression of godly energy, right? You have the entire universe, then you have the millennium, right? Then you have the specific year, the month, the week, the day, the hour of the day, right? Everything is in all of these different levels, and it's the same process as we were describing in the previous chapter, which is why the Tzemach Tzedek can say it very quickly now, because he taught the general idea before, that there's a general emanation, which implicit within that emanation, like the Gemara in the Mishnah, right? Implicit within it is everything that's going to be, and then it actually unfolds from there in its details at the lower level, right? Which in turn, that lower level becomes the general emanation for the next lower level, right? Until you get to basically the baseline human reality with which we are familiar. Sheklolos Hatziruf, second line in 368, that the general arrangements of spheres, arrangements of God's names, that each one of these forms includes all the minutes of the hour within it in one glance. And then afterwards it is divided into regayim, into moments from the minutes, right? When the Torah speaks, by the way, of moments, of minutes and seconds, you can go read in Mishnah Torah where he talks about Kiddush HaChedesh, the sanctification of the moon. We're speaking about different divisions than we have on the secular clock, by the way. A second in Torah is 1,080th of an hour. Right? That's how the Torah system was set up, and you can go read there how it's all subdivided into very. So that's why when the rabbi, if you ever notice, when the rabbi does Kiddush HaChedesh, he says the new moon will be sighted over Jerusalem on this day, at this hour, in this many parts. And he calls them parts because that's the only word for them, because it's not the same as the secular divisions. He calls it chalakim, right? V'hu hazman hayoser acharon. This, the rega, is, so to speak, the smallest unit of time for which there is an individual godly emanation, right, ruling over that specific amount of time. Ubira inyan eich yacholiyos hazman nichlal harbe bebas achas. And how could it be that so much time is included all together? How could it be that the time of a millennium is included in one glance, is included in only one expression, right? And that all of these levels are included in the ones greater than them, such that on Rosh Hashanah, for example, that's something we can understand better than a millennium. In Rosh Hashanah, there's a godly expression which includes within it the entire year and all of time together. How is that possible, that it includes the entire year? We will answer next week, God willing.